This episode is brought to you in part by the Table Podcast from the Hendricks Center at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'm Darrell Bach, one of the hosts, and I invite you to join us as we discuss issues of God and culture, which includes anything and everything. Listen on your podcast app or at dts.edu/thetable.
Hey gang, we're nearing the end of the season. Can you believe it? This one will refer to some things from earlier, but it can also stand on its own. The next episode is going to be a hard one, so I thought it was important to give us some courage. This is the War on Mark Hatfield. Have you ever gotten hate mail? I know, who even gets mail anymore? But seriously, has anyone ever come after you? Via chat room, message board, social media? It's terrible. Even when it happens on the internet and you're sure it's just a troll trying to get a name for themselves. As you may know, my twin brother and I used to make movies, and so I brought him here into what passes as a studio to talk about some of the comments we've gotten from our film, Bringing Up Bobby. How's it going, Nick?
It's going well. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a little scared.
Oh, it's okay. We went through these a few years ago on a different episode of the podcast, but why don't you read the first one from IMDb?
Oh, I like this one already. It says, Best Christian Comedy on the Market. That's nice.
Isn't that nice?
Are we the only one, though? I don't know.
I don't know. There was another one. This film was supposed to be a comedy? Exactly what scenes were supposed to be funny? That's not so good.
That's harsh. I know.
It's really harsh.
Yeah.
It's clearly a comedy.
It is clearly a comedy. I think, well, we could defend it all day long.
It's not a perfect film.
It's not a perfect film, but I could see clearly there was some comedy in there somewhere. There actually was another movie named Bringing Up Bobby as well that was not a comedy. So I wonder if they saw that one and commented on ours.
Oh, possibly.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the one after that.
Okay. All the believability is thrown out the window when a hot young lawyer falls for a fat guy with a bad haircut and 3 chins.
I'm sorry, Mark, the actor who played James. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
that's pretty harsh.
Yeah, that is. This is no different than any Kevin James movie where he gets so attractive. Come on, Mark, you don't deserve that.
So here's another one from Amazon. Did not like this video at all. It was boring and did not hold my interest. My grandchildren made the same comment. Just wasn't for me. Don't waste your money. Oh, so we're going to end with another positive one.
Oh, are we? That's nice. Okay, it says the greatest indie film of all time. Hey, look at that. Did you write that?
Yeah.
No. Okay, it says, don't call yourself a cinephile if you haven't seen Bringing Up Bobby. Wow. That's really nice. Okay.
I really like that one.
That's
Again,
great.
Could be for the other Bringing Up Bobby, but I'm going to take it. How does this stuff make you feel years later?
I've had to pray to get over some of these things, to get past it and not take it so seriously. So now I don't mind at all because I have enough distance to see that okay, it was a couple of 20-year-olds running around with a camera making a movie. So I feel better about it now.
Yeah. The day we're recording this, literally last night I had a nightmare about making movies, and we haven't made a movie since Bringing Up Bobby, which came out, 2008? Yeah.
Yeah, 2009. Yeah, it was the spring of 2009. So
I'm still having nightmares.
We do still, yeah. It is still, we still struggle with it, but I can understand where people come from on these comments. It's okay.
Comments like this still hurt. And today's episode is about a man whose career was essentially marked by hate mail. So much so that he printed some of it in his books. A state legislator, governor, and senator who had to stand up against some strong tides. Here's the story. A handsome man in his 40s took to the stage. This was 1964, the Republican National Convention in San Francisco. He sported a tidy haircut, a suit with a striped tie. Looked like maybe the most all-American Leave It to Beaver person you could possibly imagine. This was the Republican governor of Oregon, Mark Hatfield. He started his speech with some swipes at President Lyndon Johnson. Fair enough. This was the RNC. Johnson was a Democrat. Hatfield hit the usual beats about free enterprise, religious values for an American democracy, anti-communism. You know the drill so far. Then there were some twists and turns. This is an actor recreating the speech.
There are bigots in this nation who spew forth their venom of hate. They parade under hundreds of labels, including the Communist Party, the Ku Klux Klan, and the John Birch Society. They must be overcome.
Whoa, hold the phone. In 3 sentences, he punches at bigots, the Communist Party, the KKK, and the John Birch Society. This, out of context, probably seems boilerplate, unremarkable. But this was 1964. The man the GOP was about to nominate for president was funded in part by members of the John Birch Society. Barry Goldwater. Remember this? It was Goldwater who would soon say from that very stage,
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
Goldwater welcomed extremists, welcomed the Birchers, the far right, the loud and the angry, into the Republican Party. He advocated using nuclear weapons in Vietnam to clear the leaves off of trees on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Just a short while before that huge turning point in Republican politics was this straight-laced guy with the father-knows-best haircut, sending out a warning to his party. The warning was greeted with anger and literal boos. And the folks who most needed to hear it were not in the building. They were on a side quest, getting whipped up with their anger towards Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program, saying it, quote, can only result in dictatorship, end quote. Now, stop, hold on, wait just a second. Johnson was president for 4 more years. Did the Great Society result in dictatorship? No. Okay, we can keep going. Governor Hatfield issued his warning in a room filled with Goldwater supporters, saying the stuff that others didn't have the guts to say. Seriously, even Nixon thought Goldwater was a nut. In doing this, Hatfield was rolling the dice, possibly hurting his chances for a Senate run 2 years later. He could have just shut up, said nothing, gone with the flow, or danced around the obvious. But he didn't. Mark Hatfield spoke his mind. Why? Because he believed that his party was making a mistake. It's possible in this season to look at this crazy sweep of history where evangelicals were suddenly super anxious to tie themselves to the far right and think, where were the objectors? But they were there. Maybe they weren't as loud or influential, but they were there. Mark Hatfield, a Republican who advocated for small government, took several critical stands against the far right of his party, even when it was unpopular, and for it, some of his friends, religious celebrities, even his own pastor, turned their backs on him. An evangelical Christian who opposed a war, advocated for the poor and elderly, and yes, had some scandals of his own. But when it came to speaking truth to power, there was Mark Hatfield. You're listening to the show that uses journalistic tools to look inside the Christian church. We press pause on the culture wars in order to explore how we got here and how we can do better. I'm Chris Starrin, and this is Truce. Okay. Before we get too deep, I want to spell out something important. I am not arguing in this episode that Senator Mark Hatfield was perfect. There was an investigation in his last term as senator. It turns out Hatfield had failed to declare a number of gifts totaling $9,000, airline tickets worth around $5,000, and scholarships for his son to attend the University of South Carolina. His wife was also involved in a real estate transaction with an ambassador to Saudi Arabia that struck some people as fishy. She was a realtor. All of that is important because we, the people, need to know if our elected officials are taking bribes or being influenced by outside money. Hatfield admitted the errors. You can actually read a bunch of declassified FBI documents at archive.org. I'll link to it in your show notes. What we're discussing today is not a messiah. Instead, this season there's been a strong flow of information, and it will be easy to conclude that every Republican went the way of the far right. That is not the case. There were those who resisted. Okay, done with the caveats. Now to the basic bio. Mark Hatfield grew up in Oregon, going to a Methodist church, then a Baptist one. The Baptist congregation taught that Christians should stay out of politics. He was fascinated by politics. In his book, Conflict and Conscience, he lays out his spiritual journey. He was raised as a kid to do all the things.
I'll be a good boy, go to church, listen to my parents.
He had his stint with alcohol and some smoking, but kept everything pretty much on the rails. Then went to World War II, assigned to a landing craft that ferried soldiers back and forth between Okinawa and Iwo Jima. But they were short on chaplains, people to bury the dead and comfort those who were unnerved.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death.
So they asked Mark if he'd fill in when needed, which, might lead some of us to think, hey, I'm a chaplain. I got this relationship with God thing pretty much figured out. But years later, when he was dean of students at Willamette University, he began to notice he wasn't taking his faith very seriously. As dean, he counseled students, and this was a Methodist school. As he wrote,
If I could offer little real spiritual help to individuals, what did I have to offer the state, or the nation, or the world?
The turn came when a group of students asked him to lead a Bible study. He saw how committed they were to their beliefs and realized he didn't feel the same. So he dedicated himself to Christ. By the way, one of those small world things and another reason to take a deep breath with Hatfield, perhaps the most influential person in that small group, the one with a big impact on the future senator, was Doug Coe. Did you see the Netflix documentary called The Family? Doug Coe ran the organization, which operates national prayer breakfasts and mixes politics with evangelicalism in their hush-hush DC housing. None of this is cut and dry, gang. Back to Hatfield. The man openly incorporated God in his speeches and conversation. At first, he thought this would alienate folks, but he kept getting invited to talk and pray. He was the golden boy of Oregon, working his way up the ladder.
First elected to the Oregon House of Representatives in 1950.
Where he served 2 terms.
State Senate.
Then Secretary of State.
Governor of Oregon.
Where he lobbied Oregon and other governors to pass civil rights legislation. This was the 1960s, when both parties were splintering between who supported civil rights and who didn't. It could have broken either way. Finally, he became
a U.S. Senator in 1967.
Holding that title until his retirement in 1996. That is a long time. Let's return to where we started this episode, with Hatfield standing before the Republican National Convention in 1964, back when he was the governor. Here's an actor recreating another part of that same speech. Remember, this was as the war in Vietnam was ramping up.
Why? Why do they fear telling the American people what our foreign policy is, even when American boys are dying in a war without a name? Tragic as is a tomb for an unknown soldier, still more tragic is the fate of the unknowing soldier, whose life may be lost in a battle, the purpose of which he has not been told, and which he is not allowed to either win or to conclude.
Wait a second. Is he critiquing the Vietnam War in 1964? Yeah, this was a big swing for a number of reasons. A lot of evangelicals were tied up in civil religion. They didn't talk back to the president or rock the boat in politics the way we do now. We were on high alert against anything that even hinted at communism. And communist forces were taking over Vietnam. So it was possible for people to frame the debate so that if you opposed the war, you were supporting the Soviets. He wrote about his objections to Vietnam in his book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place.
To this day, I cannot understand how believing Christians who have given their allegiance to the Prince of Peace could cheer on the nation in that despicable and inhumane war.
As a Republican, you'd think it would have been cool for him to throw shade on Vietnam, because day by day, this conflict was hurting the credibility of the Democrats. When President Lyndon Johnson went in front of his fellow citizens and lied about the size of troop deployments, the GOP could have used it as leverage. But Republicans at this point largely supported the war. It took guts to take swings at Vietnam. And the nasty mail kept a-comin'. He published some of it in one of his books.
Dear Sir, a member of your Oregon staff talked to me recently and pointed out your strong religious feeling. I doubt this very much because you are against the military, which guarantees religious freedom and democracy to this nation.
Hatfield got a lot of flack for his stance, but also love from anti-war protesters who struggled to find listening ears. You know who else didn't like his position? President Johnson. In 1965, he was stepping up the war and sought the support of many different groups: business leaders, labor organizers, and governors. At the Governors' Conference that summer, Vice President Hubert Humphrey presented them with a resolution in favor of the war, supporting the president. It went over famously, except for two holdouts, both Republicans, Mark Hatfield and George Romney, father of Mitt Romney. Two governors against all the rest. But the Johnson administration wanted, no, craved unanimous support. And two guys weren't budging. The president flew everyone to the White House for a meeting with a long list of special guests.
Military officers,
Cabinet members,
staff members,
got up to speak in favor of the conflict. And George Romney folded. The only governor who voted against the measure was Mark Hatfield. In his book, Not Quite So Simple, he spent a lot of pages on Vietnam, facing the accusation that people who objected to the war had committed treason. He also expressed his horror at the scorched earth methods used by the military, including napalm, and rightly pointed out Johnson's lies. Mark Hatfield was the sole governor against the war, a war that time would not remember well. An evangelical Christian who did not hold the company in line. It wasn't just the letter writers who targeted him. So did evangelicals with large followings. Beloved men with seemingly little skin in the game. Men like Campus Crusade for Christ's Bill Bright. I'll have that story when we return. While you listen to the ads, consider texting or emailing a friend to let them know you like truce. I don't have a big budget for advertising, and your recommendations go a long way. Okay, here come the ads.
Did you know that August is Make a Will Month? Hi, I'm Corey Whitehead, and I lead advancement at Christianity Today. If you're like I was, you may think your estate plan is already covered. I had a will and beneficiaries in place, but I discovered I was missing important opportunities. Through a partnership with Philanthrocorp, I received biblically grounded estate planning guidance that helped me better steward what God has entrusted to me and support the ministries I love. The process was simple, on my schedule, and no cost for the guidance. Whether you need a will, want to update an existing plan, or simply have questions, this is a wise step worth taking. Learn more at christianitytoday.com/makeawill. Again, that's christianitytoday.com/makeawill.
This episode is brought to you in part by the Table Podcast from the Hendricks Center at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'm Darrell Bach, one of the hosts, and I invite you to join us as we discuss issues of God and culture, which includes anything and everything. Listen on your podcast app or at dts.edu/thetable.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about an evangelical politician named Mark Hatfield, one of the people who defied expectations of what it meant to be a Republican and an evangelical. When it came time for the presidential election of 1968, Hatfield was courted by Richard Nixon, seeking his support, but, still being Nixon. He didn't want to give a clear answer whether he was for or against the war. But the other option was the Democratic candidate who would, more likely than not, continue Johnson's course. So Hatfield supported Nixon. We know with hindsight that he not only continued the conflict for several more years, but he also committed what I think can only be called treason in order to get elected. It's worth a little detour. In the lead up to the 1968 election, it looked like things could go either way, Hubert Humphrey or Richard Nixon. But President Johnson, always a planner, decided to get all the players in Vietnam together to talk peace. The idea was that if they succeeded, the win would go to the Democrats. Obviously, Nixon was not excited about this. So, through back channels, Nixon blocked the summit, convincing South Vietnam to back out. It made the Democrats look like they couldn't deliver the goods on peace. And Nixon, the guy who Hatfield had endorsed, won the election by prolonging the war. And prolong it he did. By the end of Nixon's first year in the big chair, it was becoming clear that something had to be done. Democrat George McGovern and Republican Mark Hatfield worked with others to craft H.R. 17123, known as the McGovern-Hatfield Amendment, essentially cutting funding to the war, withdrawing from Cambodia in 30 days, and Vietnam within a year, prompting, you guessed it, more hate mail, like this.
Dear Mr. Hatfield, your encouragement of anti-war demonstrations and riots that have come from such demonstrations are in fact treason, for they give comfort and aid to our enemies. I and a lot of other Christian people are extremely disappointed in your performance in the Senate, for you who claim to be a Christian and have access to our almighty God should have a better understanding of human nature and the evil in the human heart.
This letter went on to ask, what right does Hatfield, a senator, have to interfere with the Nixon administration's plans in Vietnam? Doesn't Romans 13 tell us to respect our leaders? Of course, this person makes the clear error of forgetting that the executive branch is not over the legislative branch. They were designed to be equals, not for Congress to take orders from the president. In a move that must have stung, even Hatfield's own pastor sharply criticized him. Despite his bad reviews, the bill brought in the greatest flood of supportive mail in Senate history. In promoting the measure before Congress, McGovern said,
"Every senator in this chamber is partly responsible for sending 50,000 young Americans to an early grave. This chamber reeks of blood."
Despite the outpour of support from the American people, the measure failed. They tried again, and that too failed. At this time, Hatfield was in a weird position, invited to speak at evangelical events, but also assaulted with negative letters questioning his Christian testimony, bringing us to Bill Bright. As you may remember from my episode about Bright, he was the founder of Campus Crusade for Christ, now known as Cru, an organization that had a positive impact on my life. Here is John G. Turner, historian and author of Bill Bright and Campus Crusade for Christ, The Renewal of Evangelicalism in Post-War America.
For the most part, he was one of many conservative evangelicals who might have said that his point was not partisan, but I don't think he could really conceive of any reasonable grounds for why a sincere Christian would not align him or herself with the Republican Party. It's not so much that he thought of himself as a partisan. He just thought that, on balance, the Republican Party supported positions that were commonsensical for Christians to support.
This shone brightly in Bright. This assumption that evangelicals and the GOP were the same thing.
He had a very hard time even abiding more liberal Republicans like Mark Hatfield.
Because remember, Hatfield was a Republican who just happened to identify as progressive. There had not always been animosity between these two guys.
So Hatfield had been on Campus Crusade's board of directors from the late 50s through the 1960s.
Which, should have made them friends. But some of the stuff we've already covered was making that difficult.
Was really Hatfield's later opposition to the Vietnam War that drove a political wedge between Bill Bright and himself.
That may seem weird. How could this war on the other side of the world split up a friendship? It had more to do with what the war represented in the minds of conservatives at the time.
They basically supported American involvement in Vietnam as part of Christian opposition to communism.
Thinking that if we didn't intervene there, the dominoes would fall. More and more nations in Asia would succumb to communism. Again, if you've heard season 3, you know that communism got a lot of people killed, shut down religion, starved huge populations. It was just not a good way to go. But was shooting innocent villagers, their wives and children, and burning their houses the way to sell capitalism?
When you have an intra-evangelical political disagreement, it's fierce because everybody's supposed to be on the same side. And so if you have somebody like Hatfield, as far as Bright was concerned, veering off in a different direction and abandoning a core principle, which is anti-communism, that to Bright was really disturbing. And Hatfield didn't want anything to do with what he would have considered the fringe right.
Then a contentious article dropped. It was published in the left-leaning Sojourners magazine and written by friends of Hatfield. They criticized Bright and his compadre John Conlon for their efforts in using their publishing wing, Third Century Publishing, to organize voters. An accusation that just happened to be true. Their books were literal blueprints of how to organize a political party, like In the Spirit of 76, which contains forms and documents you can reproduce. They taught political organizing in hopes of energizing evangelicals in Republican politics. Third Century had ties to the Christian Freedom Foundation, or CFF. One of its goals, according to Amway's president Richard DeVos, was to
get rid of those so-called liberal Christians like Mark Hatfield.
The journalist who wrote the article went to Bright for comment. What he said, to his credit, does fit one of the 4 spiritual laws. All people are sinful and separated from God. Bright said,
"If you write this article, I have some power in the churches. I will destroy you."
He believed that Hatfield had orchestrated the expose. Bright invited the president of CFF over to his house and said,
"Vanette and I are going to have dinner with you. It's going to be the 3 of us, and we're going to pray the wrath of God on Mark Hatfield."
It got so heated that former Nixon aide and born-again celebrity Chuck Colson called a meeting to try and reunite the two men. It was not successful. For one, Bright insisted his political doings were non-partisan. They weren't. The religious right did not stop coming for Mark Hatfield. Remember the beginning of the season, the first episode? I know, it was a long time ago. I told the story of 2 senators who were being attacked by conservatives.
Mr. President, I believe the techniques used to exploit the issue of the canal treaties are the most compelling evidence to date that an ominous change is taking place in the very character and direction of American politics.
They called themselves the New Right, and they coordinated volunteers and money and press and dirty tricks to get their kind of people in office. Far-right conservatives who could at least pay lip service to Christianity. One of the 2 senators who tried to expose the New Right's dirty tricks, no surprise, was Mark Hatfield, who, once again, got some nasty mail.
"I have letters here. I thought you were a born-again Christian. Now I know you are not because you support the treaty. They do not bother to ask my view of Jesus Christ in an effort to reach some determination of my salvation. Instead, they chose to make a judgment on my religious salvation on basis of my position regarding the Panama Canal Treaty."
You remember this. Hatfield was, once again, under attack from the far right of his own party. This time, it wasn't Vietnam or the John Birch Society. It was about his support for the Panama Canal Treaty, which would give the canal, that obvious American imperialism, over to the people of Panama. See how this all ties together? The religious right and the New Right wielded their new tool. Evangelicals who were political activists for the extreme end of the party, and then turned it up to 11. I want to remind you yet again, Mark Hatfield was both an evangelical and a Republican. But by the 1970s, he wasn't conservative enough. Now, what was their measuring stick? The sign of a real evangelical Republican. One of his biographers characterizes their core beliefs as
true evangelicals, they say, must believe that welfare is bad, the rhetoric of civil rights is questionable, war is necessary, support of the president is required, particularly when he or she is a Republican, and free enterprise is next to godliness.
If that's the measuring stick, I have news for you. Mark Hatfield, though not against the poor, was anti-welfare. He wanted federal money for the poor to be given to local governments to deflate the power at the federal level, an almost libertarian idea. He also thought that it was the duty of churches to adopt impoverished people, making welfare essentially unnecessary. Not exactly a liberal point of view. Hatfield did support presidents until they failed him and the American people. He believed in free enterprise, but it still wasn't enough for the far right. Perhaps it was his stance to help people of color, or to defend the rights of the poor. He had visited Mother Teresa in Calcutta, seen the terrible poverty there, just as surveying Indochina had shaped his view of Vietnam. Mark Hatfield's real sin in the eyes of the religious right was nuance, going beyond their simple definitions. He dared to call the wealthiest country in the world to care even a little about our neighbors. And I want to be clear, the man was no angel. But in the cacophony of information out there, the crazy amount of details in this season, don't lose sight of the fact that there were evangelical Christians standing against the tide. Did it stop the right from capturing pop Christianity? Radio, books, mailings, sermons, universities? No. If anything, they used guys like him to prove how liberals were coming for your children. But he stood strong, which must have taken real courage. It led to some dark nights of the soul. His books are full of that. Somehow, despite all the opposition, the man was in some form of government service for 46 years. Think of the courage it took to stand on that stage in 1964, to denounce the communists, the Ku Klux Klan, and the John Birch Society in the same breath, while assuming that the candidate of his party was going to be supported by 2/3 of that equation. Despite the tide moving against him, many nasty letters from people who claimed the name of Christ, despite being on the unpopular side of fights with the most powerful men in the world, Mark Hatfield held his ground. He, like the minor prophets of the Old Testament, sought God's word, called out injustice, spoke up for the voiceless, and exposed people in power. Not a perfect man, but someone who dared to question his own people, no matter the comments or the hate mail. This episode used so many sources. Thanks to John G. Turner for talking about Hatfield during our interview about Bill Bright. His book is Bill Bright and Campus Crusade for Christ. I also relied on Nixonland by Rick Perlstein, which is just hauntingly good and covers aspects of the 1960s and 70s that nobody else does. It's also blessedly readable. I'll have a list of sources on the website and in your show notes at trucepodcast.com. While you're on the site, why not take a second to give a little money to help this project? Even $10 a month goes a long way. Thanks to everyone who gave me their voices for this episode, including Chris Sloan, Jackie Hart, Bob Stevenson, Marcus Watson of the Spiritual Life and Leadership podcast, and David Linder of the Worship Ministry Catalyst podcast. Truce is a production of Truce Media, LLC. God willing, we'll talk again soon. I'm Chris Starin, and this is Truce.
This episode is brought to you in part by the Table Podcast from the Hendricks Center at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'm Darrell Bach, one of the hosts, and I invite you to join us as we discuss issues of God and culture, which includes anything and everything. Listen on your podcast app or at dts.edu/thetable.